He should have been gone that morning, the veteran in the wheelchair, helpless on a frozen ridge outside Bozeman. But instead of an ending, it became the beginning of a miracle. Logan Pierce, once a proud Marine, was betrayed in the unlikeliest way, not by an enemy on the battlefield, but by the very person who vowed to love him. Yet, as the world misread the signs, believing he had given up, it was loyalty fierce, unyielding, that pulled him back from the edge. A German shepherd named Atlas, scarred but steadfast, refused to let his partner vanish into silence. And while rumors spread, a hidden photo, a forged letter, and a whisper of truth began to unravel a far darker story. This isn't just about survival. It's about the kind of faith and loyalty that can only be described as divine intervention. So lean in, because every turn of this story will test what you think you know about love, betrayal, and redemption. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you believe loyalty still saves lives, and write Amen if your heart is ready for this journey. Now, have you poured your ginger tea or hot coffee? Let's walk through the storm together. The morning in Bozeman was brittle with cold. The kind of cold that pressed against every window pane and rattled through every seam of the old wooden houses nestled near Hyalite Canyon. Snow lay in thick white sheets across the valley, muffling sound as though the entire world had agreed to hold its breath. Logan Pierce sat by the frosted window of his cabin, his motorized wheelchair angled slightly so he could watch the pale sun trying to rise behind the sawtooth peaks. At 33, Logan had the face of a man both young and aged beyond his years. His jaw was still sharp, his cheekbones defined, but the war had carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes. A jagged scar cut diagonally from his temple to just above his cheekbone, the permanent reminder of a roadside bomb in Afghanistan that had taken his legs and with them most of his confidence. He had been a Marine, proud and strong, and now he lived each day trying to reconcile the soldier he had been with the man he saw in the mirror. His shoulders remained broad, his arms strong from years of forcing himself to adapt. But the hollow ache in his chest was something no amount of therapy had managed to fill. He often masked it with stoic silence, with the kind of dry humor that made others think he was coping better than he was. That morning, Logan typed a message to his old comrade, Grant Sawyer, a man who had once led him into battle and now occasionally came by to help maintain the property. "I can't do this anymore," he wrote. He meant the grueling physical therapy sessions scheduled for the coming week, the endless cycle of pain and recovery that seemed to loop with no progress. But the words looked heavier on the glowing phone screen, darker than he intended. He hesitated before pressing send, his thumb lingering, then let it go. Somewhere out there, Grant would read it and maybe misunderstand. The thought unsettled him, but not enough to rewrite the truth of his exhaustion. Behind him, the sound of careful footsteps clicked softly against the hardwood. Logan Pierce, his wife of 2 years, entered the room, her tall frame wrapped in a fitted wool coat the color of midnight. Lauren was in her mid-30s, strikingly beautiful in a way that seemed almost curated. Her raven black hair was pulled into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, her pale skin flawless, her jawline sharp as though chiseled from stone. Strangers often described her as elegant, statuesque, the kind of woman who seemed more like a portrait than a partner. But to Logan, her beauty carried a distance he could never quite bridge. Once, when they first met at a veterans fundraiser in Phoenix, she had been warm, full of smiles that felt genuine. Now her affection seemed rehearsed, her voice carefully measured, her presence more like an obligation than a comfort. Logan couldn't decide if the cold he often felt in her company came from her or from the void within himself. "Bundle up," Lauren said, her tone flat but efficient. "You wanted to see the sunrise at Highlight Overlook." Today's the day she didn't ask if he felt strong enough. She didn't wait for him to agree. She was already moving behind his chair, adjusting the blanket across his lap. Her perfume was faint, something floral, but it mixed oddly with the sterile scent of antiseptic that clung to him from hospital visits. Logan's hands tightened around the armrests. He wanted to object, to say the snow was too thick, the wind too biting, but he swallowed it. "Fine," he muttered, letting her push him toward the front door. Part of him still longed for her approval, even when he suspected it no longer mattered. On the porch, tied to a cedar post, Atlas stirred. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, broad-shouldered with a deep sable coat streaked in gray and rust. His amber eyes followed every movement of his master, sharp and intelligent, carrying the kind of silent loyalty only dogs could hold. Atlas had once served alongside Logan in military operations, trained to detect explosives and sense danger before it struck. His right ear bore a small notch from shrapnel, his muzzle sprinkled with lighter fur that gave him the look of a seasoned veteran. Since their return, Atlas had been forced into the role of just a dog, banned from the house by Lauren's strict rules: no dogs on the couch, no dogs in the kitchen, no dogs upstairs. But he remained steadfast, guarding the property from the porch, his presence a constant reassurance to Logan that he was never entirely alone. As Lauren wheeled Logan down the ramp and toward the snowy trail that led up to Highlight Overlook, Atlas began to whimper, his breath puffing white into the icy air. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. He tugged hard against the rope, muscles straining, until the post groaned beneath the pressure. Logan glanced back, his heart tightening at the sight of his companion. "He'll be fine," Lauren said quickly, her grip tightening on the wheelchair handles. But her voice carried no warmth, no attempt to soothe. The moment they disappeared beyond the tree line, Atlas growled low, then lunged. The rope snapped with a sharp crack, and the shepherd darted into the forest, his paws silent against the snow. He followed the faint scent of his master, cutting through drifts and shadows with the precision of memory. As the chair rolled forward along the trail, Logan tried to steady his breathing. The path was familiar, yet the silence felt different today, heavier. He looked down at his hands, scarred knuckles pale against the cold, and wondered why his chest ached with unease. Lauren's presence loomed behind him, steady, unyielding, but her silence pressed against him harder than the wind. He thought about the text he had sent to Grant and winced. Would Grant read it and think he was giving up? Would anyone believe otherwise? Lauren's hands tightened once more on the chair, pushing him toward the overlook where the trees opened up to reveal a sheer drop, the valley yawning wide beneath. The snow crunched under the wheels, the cliff's edge a white blur ahead. Logan swallowed hard, his stomach twisting, unsure if the trembling came from the cold or from something deeper. Behind them, unseen, Atlas sprinted faster, his amber eyes locked on the trail, his body a streak of determination against the snow. And just as the overlook came into view, Lauren leaned closer to Logan's ear. Her voice was soft, almost tender, but carried a weight that froze the blood in his veins. "Almost there," she whispered. The chair jolted as the gravel beneath thinned into ice. Logan's heart hammered. He tried to turn, to look at her face, but she pressed harder, faster. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw her lips curve, not in warmth, but in something else entirely. The snow-laden air thickened. The cliff loomed closer, and Atlas, still yards behind, barked once, sharp and desperate, as though he sensed he might already be too late. The wheels of the chair hissed against the ice, metal scraping faintly where rubber met frozen gravel. Logan Pierce felt the sudden weightlessness as the slope pitched downward, the horizon lurching toward him in a dizzying rush. For an instant he thought the chair had slipped on its own, that the storm of panic was a cruel trick of nature. But then he remembered the pressure of Lauren's hands, the moment they lifted away, the subtle exhale at his ear. He gripped the armrests, knuckles pale against the cold, and braced for the inevitable plunge. The world tilted, and then, with a bone-jarring impact, he slammed sideways onto a jagged ledge jutting from the cliff face. His body rattled, breath driven from his lungs, the wheelchair wedged precariously between two outcrops of stone. Snow slid in sheets around him, cascading like small avalanches. Pain shot through his ribs and across his shoulder, where old scars tore open, warm blood spreading beneath his jacket. His vision blurred, and then the world narrowed into a haze of white and gray as unconsciousness dragged him under. Above, Logan Pierce stood motionless at the cliff's edge, her coat snapping in the icy wind. Her pale hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed, lips pressed into a thin line. She glanced down once quickly, then turned away. Her beauty-polished, poised looked sharper now, like glass ready to cut. She adjusted her gloves with deliberate calm and began walking back along the trail, boots crunching over the snow. Her long legs carried her swiftly, as though she had already rehearsed this retreat. If anyone saw her now, they would see only a woman taking a winter walk, not someone who had just abandoned her husband to a fall that should have killed him. The forest stirred with movement. Atlas burst through the tree line, his deep sable coat flecked with snow, his chest heaving as he skidded to a halt. His amber eyes widened at the sight of the empty trail and the wheelchair tracks running straight toward the abyss. A desperate bark ripped from his throat, echoing against the canyon walls. He lunged forward, claws scraping rock, and peered down. There was no body visible from where he stood, only broken drifts of snow tumbling into the void. Atlas growled, low and furious, tail rigid, then howled, the sound raw with grief and rage. His bark was not only for his master, it was a warning to the world that betrayal had been witnessed. Farther back along the ridge, another figure paused at the sound of the howl. Grace Nolan, a wildlife photographer in her late 20s, lowered her telephoto lens and squinted through the viewfinder. Grace had come to Bozeman for the winter season, hoping to capture the elk migration against the snowy backdrop of Hyalite Canyon. She was petite, 5'4", with a mane of curly auburn hair escaping from beneath a knitted beanie. Her face was pale from the cold, freckles dusted across her nose, and her hazel eyes carried both curiosity and fatigue. Life had not been gentle. Her father, a journalist, had died in a logging accident when she was 16, leaving her with a fierce independence and a mistrust of anything that seemed too polished. Photography had become her refuge, the lens a way to make sense of chaos. When Atlas's howl cut through the silence, Grace instinctively turned her camera toward the noise. She was several hundred meters away, perched on a slope with a clear view of the overlook. Through the falling snow, her camera caught the blur of motion, a wheelchair sliding toward the cliff, silhouetted starkly against the white. She pressed the shutter out of reflex, capturing a series of frames as the chair vanished over the edge. Her heart pounded, but she told herself she had probably just witnessed an accident. People slipped on ice all the time in Montana. Still, something gnawed at her, the timing, the loneliness of that image. Grace pulled the camera back and checked the preview on the small digital screen. The photo was grainy, distorted by the distance and snowfall, but the narrative it suggested was clear. A man in a wheelchair alone at the cliff's edge, sliding toward the abyss. It looked like despair given physical form. She frowned, biting her lip. If she shared this, people would assume he had chosen to fall. Suicide, they would whisper. Yet she wasn't sure. She hadn't seen another figure. She hadn't seen the woman. All she had was an image that, in its imperfection, could be misinterpreted. Atlas barked again, the sound slicing through Grace's thoughts. She lowered her camera, hugging it against her chest. Her breath clouded the air as she whispered to herself, "What did I just see?" Down below, Logan stirred faintly, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. His body was wedged painfully against the jagged rocks, every shallow breath a fight. He tried to move, but his torso refused to obey. Darkness tugged at the edges of his consciousness, but he clung to the thought of Atlas. The dog would not leave. Atlas had never left. That memory anchored him, though his mind slipped further into haze. Grace adjusted her gloves and began to pack up, unsettled by what she had witnessed. She thought about hiking closer, but the snow was heavy, and she was alone. Her practical side reminded her that if it truly was an accident, someone else nearby would find the man. Besides, she had no way of knowing exactly where the chair had gone over. Still, as she strapped her camera into its case, the image of the lone wheelchair sliding toward the cliff lingered. She couldn't shake the chill it left, a chill deeper than the winter air. Atlas paced at the cliff's edge, ears pricked, nose working furiously. He barked down into the canyon, then turned sharply, sprinting back along the trail. He had seen Lauren vanish down the path, but his instincts told him the answer was elsewhere. The snow fell harder now, obscuring the tracks, but Atlas ran with the memory of scent, heart pounding with the urgency of survival. Back in town, life went on oblivious to the cliffside drama. Cars rolled slowly along Main Street, their tires crunching over salted roads. In a small cafe near the square, Grace stopped for warmth. She pulled her camera card and slid it into her laptop, reviewing the shots. The photo of the wheelchair appeared on the screen, sharper now in digital detail. She zoomed in, squinting. Snow blurred the edges, but the implication was undeniable. A man alone, rolling toward death. She chewed the inside of her cheek, conflicted. Was it her responsibility to share this? Or would she only spread misunderstanding? She closed the laptop abruptly, her reflection catching in the dark screen. Her face looked troubled, her hazel eyes shadowed by doubt. She took a sip of her coffee, bitter and hot, and told herself she would decide later. Outside, the snowstorm thickened. Atlas's barks still echoed faintly in the distance, unheard by the townsfolk going about their day. And down on the ledge, Logan's breath grew weaker, his eyelids fluttering shut. The chair groaned as the ice beneath it shifted, a sound too small to carry, but enough to signal that the fragile hold keeping him alive was beginning to give way. Snow fell harder as Atlas tore down the mountain trail, his thick sable coat drenched in flakes, breath bursting in visible clouds. Every stride was powered by instinct, by training, and by an unshakable bond with the man who had once saved him on foreign soil. His paws pounded the frozen ground until the familiar scent of smoke and cedar reached him. Ahead stood the cabin, its roof blanketed in white. the chimney sending up faint wisps that twisted into the storm. Atlas lunged up the porch steps, claws scraping wood, and barked with a ferocity that shook the stillness of the yard. Inside, Grant Sawyer looked up from the workbench where he had been repairing an old lantern. He was a man in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair cropped short and a beard that traced a strong jawline. His blue eyes, weathered by years of service and Montana winters, carried the weight of someone who had seen too much but refused to be broken by it. He had been Logan's commanding officer in Afghanistan, a man known for his iron discipline and dry humor. When shrapnel ended his military career, Grant returned to Bozeman to rebuild his life through hard ranch work and caretaking the Pierce property. He was loyal, blunt, and slow to trust outsiders' traits shaped by the battlefield and sharpened by the loneliness of civilian life. Hearing Atlas's desperate barking, Grant's instincts flared. He grabbed his jacket, a thick canvas coat lined with shearling, and stepped outside. "What the hell, boy?" he muttered, crouching to meet the dog's frantic eyes. Atlas snarled, then tugged sharply at his sleeve, pulling toward the trail. Grant's brows furrowed. He had seen dogs panic before, but never Atlas. This was different, urgent, purposeful. Without another thought, he snatched a coil of climbing rope and an old harness from the shed, slung them over his shoulder, and followed. The storm thickened, whipping snow sideways in sheets that stung exposed skin. Atlas led with absolute certainty, weaving through the pines, barking every few strides to make sure Grant stayed close. By the time they reached Widow's Overlook, Grant's boots were coated in ice, his breath ragged in the frigid air. He froze when he saw the tracks, the twin grooves of wheelchair tires cutting straight toward the cliff. His gut clenched. He staggered forward, peered over the edge, and his chest tightened at the sight. 30 feet down, wedged between two rocks, was Logan. His head slumped forward, his jacket torn, blood staining his sleeve. The wheelchair hung at an impossible angle, one wheel jutting out over empty air. Atlas barked furiously, leaning so far forward Grant had to grab his collar to keep him from leaping after. "Hold on, Marine!" Grant shouted into the void, his voice cracking. "I've got you!" He anchored the rope around a thick pine trunk, checked the knots with trembling hands, and clipped himself into the harness. The wind clawed at him, the cliff face slick with melting ice. Atlas paced back and forth, barking in sharp bursts that cut through the howl of the storm. Slowly, Grant rappelled down, boots scraping for footholds, his gloved fingers clinging to the rope. Each drop of freezing water stung his face like needles. When he reached Logan, his heart lurched. Logan's skin was pale, lips tinged blue, blood crusting at his temple. His eyes fluttered but did not open. Grant pressed 2 fingers to his neck. There it was, faint but steady. Relief surged through him. "You stubborn bastard," Grant muttered, strapping the secondary harness around Logan's chest. He tightened knots with the precision of old training, whispered encouragements even though Logan could not hear them. "You're not dying on my watch." Above, Atlas crouched low, his eyes never leaving the scene. His ears twitched at every creak of the rope, every groan of shifting ice. When Grant tugged twice on the line, Atlas barked, as if to confirm the signal. Inch by inch, Grant hauled Logan upward, his muscles burning against the weight and the storm's fury. At last, Atlas saw his master's body rise over the lip of the cliff. The dog lunged forward, licking Logan's bloodied face, whining with urgency. Grant collapsed beside them, chest heaving, snow caking his beard. "We've got to move," he rasped, scooping Logan into a fireman's carry, ignoring his own screaming muscles. Atlas stayed close, ears pricked, eyes darting into the woods, as if guarding every step of their retreat. Together, the three figures staggered back down the trail, swallowed by the storm. By the time they reached Bozeman General Hospital, night had fallen. The emergency bay glowed sterile white, nurses rushing out with a gurney. Dr. Lee Connolly took charge the moment Logan was wheeled inside. She was in her early 40s, with russet curls pinned into a loose bun, green eyes sharp behind rectangular glasses. Her frame was lean, her voice firm but calm. Known among staff for her ability to balance authority with compassion, she had treated countless winter injuries, but rarely something this dire. Multiple contusions, possible hypothermia, spinal trauma, she ordered briskly, her gloved hands already probing for response. Get him into trauma room 2. Grant followed until a nurse blocked his path. He stood rigid, fists clenched, eyes burning with helplessness. Atlas tried to push forward, but another nurse stepped between. He's not a pet, Grant growled. That dog's the reason this man's still breathing. The staff exchanged glances, reluctant, then nodded. Atlas padded in beside the stretcher, dripping water onto the linoleum, never letting his amber eyes leave Logan. In the waiting area, Detective Dana Cole arrived, shaking snow from her parka. Dana was in her late 30s, tall and angular, with close-cropped black hair and a steady gaze that missed little. Her skin was pale from years in Montana winters, her demeanor professional, restrained. She had earned a reputation in Bozeman PD as a patient, but relentless investigator, shaped by a career where lies often came wrapped in polite smiles. Her father had been a park ranger who died during a rescue mission, a loss that taught her early to distrust easy explanations. She approached Grant, flipping open a small notepad. What happened? She asked evenly. Grant's jaw tightened. I found him at Widow's Overlook. Chair went over the cliff, Dana scribbled, eyes narrowing. Did he fall or was he pushed? The question cut like ice. Grant hesitated. All I know is he damn near died. Ask his wife where she was. As if summoned, Logan Pierce entered the hospital, her cream coat spotless, her black hair loose around her shoulders. She looked composed, almost radiant, her beauty unmarred by the storm outside. Her heels clicked softly against the tile as she approached the desk. My husband, Logan Pierce, she said smoothly, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. He was supposed to leave for Missoula this morning for early rehab. I don't understand how he ended up here. Dana studied her carefully, noting the precision of her words, the lack of genuine shock. She jotted down a line in her pad, expression unreadable. Inside the trauma room, Logan stirred faintly, lips parting in a groan. Atlas's ears shot up, and he growled low when Lauren's perfume drifted through the doorway. Nurses froze. The dog's hackles rose, his body tense as he positioned himself between the bed and the approaching figure. His growl deepened into a warning, reverberating in the sterile air. Lauren's eyes flickered, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Call him off, she snapped at Grant, her voice sharp. Voice. Grant crossed his arms. That's not how he works. He senses threats. The room went silent, tension thick as ice, forming over a river. Logan's eyes fluttered open briefly, his gaze hazy but drawn to the sound of Atlas's growl. His lips moved, a whisper too faint to hear. And then, with a sudden jolt, the heart monitor beeped erratically, sending nurses rushing forward, cutting short every question in the room. Grace Nolan sat in her apartment above a hardware store in downtown Bozeman, the glow of her laptop screen casting shadows across the cluttered room. A half-finished cup of coffee sat forgotten beside her camera gear, its bitter aroma mixing with the faint scent of old pine wood that clung to the building. She hesitated for nearly an hour before she uploaded the compressed version of the photo she had taken that morning. The image, blurry and grainy, showed nothing more than a lone wheelchair gliding toward the cliff's edge, a moment frozen in ambiguity. She posted it in a private online group frequented by local outdoor enthusiasts, adding only a caption, "Highlight overlook, anyone know what happened here?" Within minutes, comments poured in. Some speculated that the man had chosen to end his life. Others said it was simply an accident on ice. A few whispered about a Marine veteran they'd heard lived near the canyon. Grace's chest tightened as she read. She hadn't mentioned Logan's name, but she knew how quickly rumors in a small town could spread. She closed the laptop with a snap, her pulse quickening. Had she just planted the seed of misunderstanding that could shape an entire narrative? While speculation brewed online, far from town, the storm had eased enough for Ranger Noah Green to begin his survey of the overlook. Noah was in his mid-40s, a rangy man with sun-worn skin and a square jaw shaded by a perpetual 5 o'clock beard. His Green Ranger jacket fit snugly over a frame hardened by years of patrolling Montana's unforgiving wilderness. His dark blonde hair, streaked with gray, curled slightly under his wool cap. He had a reputation among the Forest Service for being methodical, perhaps to the point of obsession, a trait shaped by a tragedy in his early career when a missing hiker had died on his watch. Since then, Noah had vowed never to dismiss the smallest detail. He walked carefully along the trail, flashlight beam cutting across the snow. The twin grooves of wheelchair tracks were still visible, frozen into the surface, ending abruptly at the cliff. He crouched, ran a gloved hand across the ice. The surface was slick, a sheen of hardened meltwater beneath the snow. To an untrained eye, it could easily look like a slip. Noah scribbled notes in his weatherproof pad, muttering to himself, "No drag marks, no hesitation, no evidence of braking." He stood, eyes narrowing. But not enough here to rule out accident. He snapped photos with his service camera, the wind whistling low around him, as though the canyon itself refused to surrender its truth. Back at the Pierce estate, Rosa Martinez carried a laundry basket through the quiet halls. In her late 50s, Rosa was a compact woman with olive-toned skin, wiry gray-black hair tied in a braid, and hands calloused from decades of domestic work. She had been with the Pierce family for more than a decade, long before Lauren entered the picture. Her sharp, dark eyes missed little, though she kept her observations to herself unless absolutely necessary. Years of labor had given her a quiet strength, and years of disappointment had instilled in her a careful distrust of those who wore polished smiles. As she emptied a small trash bin in the upstairs study, something caught her eye. Torn papers, the edges smeared with ink. She set down the basket and carefully retrieved the scraps. Her brows furrowed as she pieced them together. They formed part of a letterhead from St. Agnes Rehabilitation Center, but the dates were mismatched. One signature line, scrawled hastily, looked wrong-slanted, inconsistent. Rosa's stomach tightened. She had seen official mail before. This looked like a forgery. Beneath the paper, she found a voicemail transcript printed from Lauren's phone. The message contained a careless slip. "If he's gone early, no one will question it. Just make sure the cover holds." Rosa's hands trembled as she slid the evidence into a freezer bag. She whispered a prayer under her breath, the cross around her neck cold against her skin. Then she pulled on her coat and headed for the hospital. Meanwhile, at Bozeman General, Logan lay unconscious in a private room, machines humming steadily. His face was pale against the stark white of the pillow, bandages wrapping his shoulder and head. Atlas sprawled on the floor beside the bed, his thick sable fur damp but slowly drying in the hospital's warmth. His amber eyes never left Logan, watching every shallow rise and fall of his chest. Occasionally, he let out a low whine, as if speaking to his master through dreams. Nurses walked by and shook their heads with quiet amusement. Though pets weren't normally allowed, exceptions were made. One of the staff noted in Logan's file, "Service dog permitted for emotional support behavior, indicates protective instinct." Detective Dana Cole entered the ward, her boots clicking softly against the linoleum. She had spent the afternoon interviewing Lauren, whose story was precise but suspiciously polished. Logan had supposedly left early for treatment in Missoula. Dana's instincts told her something was wrong, but she needed proof. Her eyes softened when she saw Atlas lying faithfully by the bed. "You know something, don't you?" she murmured, kneeling briefly to meet the dog's gaze. Atlas's ears twitched, but his attention stayed fixed on Logan. The door creaked open, and Rosa stepped inside, clutching the freezer bag. "Detective," she said quietly, her accent laced with years of Spanish spoken at home. Dana straightened, curious. Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she held out the bag. "I found these in the trash at the house. I don't know if they mean anything, but I think they do." Dana opened the bag, her eyes scanning the forged papers and the transcript, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You did the right thing, Rosa." She lowered her voice. "This could be the start of what we need." Rosa exhaled shakily, her gaze drifting toward Logan. "He doesn't deserve this." Not after everything. Dana placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare gesture of comfort. "We'll see it through." Outside, the winter wind howled against the hospital windows. Grace, sitting alone in her apartment miles away, stared at the photo again, her mind at war. She knew she had just set off whispers that might paint Logan as a broken man who had chosen the cliff, but another part of her wondered if she had caught more than she realized. Something hidden in the blur, waiting to be revealed. And at the overlook, Ranger Noah Green finished his survey, standing with his hands on his hips, breath fogging in the freezing air. He closed his notebook and looked once more at the cliff. "Not enough to close the file," he muttered. His instincts told him the story wasn't as simple as ice. He turned to leave, unaware that behind him, half buried in snow, a small scrap of dark fabric fluttered against the rocks. Back in Logan's hospital room, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor suddenly spiked, Atlas jerking upright with a sharp bark, startling the nurse on duty. Logan's eyelids fluttered, his lips moving as though forming a word, but no sound came. The room fell silent, everyone leaning closer, waiting for the whisper that might change everything. The storm had lifted overnight, leaving Hyalite Canyon cloaked in a deceptive calm. The air was sharp, every breath cutting like glass in the lungs, and the snow gleamed under a pale winter sun. Grant Sawyer trudged back toward Widow's Overlook with Ranger Noah Green at his side, both men moving with the kind of quiet focus born of experience. Grant's heavy boots sank into the drifts, his broad shoulders hunched under a thick canvas coat. His face, lined by years of combat and hardship, was set in grim determination. He was not a man easily rattled, but the image of Logan slumped against the jagged ledge haunted him all night. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Noah Green walked slightly ahead, his lanky frame steady despite the uneven terrain. His wool cap was pulled low over his blonde gray hair, and his sharp eyes scanned the trail with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. He had been awake most of the night, too, replaying the scene in his mind, measuring the facts against his instincts. His notepad bulged in his jacket pocket, its pages filled with sketches and notes, arrows pointing to possibilities he had yet to confirm. When they reached the overlook, the snow still bore faint evidence of the morning before. The wheelchair grooves ran straight, clean, unwavering, 2 frozen scars in the white. Noah crouched, brushing away loose powder with a gloved hand. He muttered, more to himself than to Grant, "No drag, no hesitation." This wasn't a slip. He straightened, his weathered face tightening. This was deliberate momentum. Grant stared at the tracks, jaw clenched. "So he didn't roll himself," he said flatly. "Someone pushed him." Noah met his gaze and nodded once. "That's what it looks like." At that same moment, across town, Grace Nolan sat in her cluttered apartment, the blinds drawn against the pale sunlight. Her laptop was open on the desk, the RAW files from her camera loaded into editing software. Her hands trembled as she zoomed in on the sequence she had captured the morning of the fall. The compressed image she had posted online had already caused a stir, whispers, assumptions, pity for a man many now believed had chosen to end his life. The weight of that misunderstanding pressed heavy on her chest. She enlarged the frames, applied noise reduction, adjusted contrast. Slowly, through the blur of falling snow, a shape began to emerge. It was faint but unmistakable, a figure standing just behind the wheelchair, hands on the handles, body tense in the instant before the slide. Grace leaned back, her hazel eyes wide, breath catching in her throat. "God," she whispered, pressing a hand to her mouth. She hadn't just captured an accident. She had captured evidence of intent. She thought of closing the laptop, of pretending she hadn't seen it, but her conscience burned too hot. With shaky hands, she transferred the RAW file onto a flash drive, slipped it into her jacket pocket, and grabbed her camera bag. Her father had always told her that truth mattered, even when it was dangerous. Today, those words weighed heavier than ever. At Bozeman PD headquarters, Detective Dana Cole sat in a cramped office, the walls lined with maps and case photos. She was reviewing Rosa Martinez's freezer bag of forged documents, her dark eyes scanning every smudge and line of ink. The forged rehab transfer letters had already been flagged by handwriting experts as suspicious. The voicemail transcript Rosa had salvaged echoed in Dana's mind. "If he's gone early, no one will question it. Just make sure the cover holds." It wasn't proof of a crime, but it was the kind of thread an investigator knew how to pull. The knock on her door was soft. Grace stepped in, her auburn hair frizzing slightly under her knit beanie, cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked nervous, clutching the flash drive as though it burned her palm. "Detective Cole?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "I think I have something you need to see." Dana gestured to the chair opposite. "Sit." Her tone was calm, reassuring. Grace handed her the drive, explaining about the photo, the upload, the comments. Dana slid the drive into her computer, pulled up the image and leaned closer. Her sharp eyes narrowed. She could see it too, the blurred but undeniable outline of a figure behind the wheelchair. She froze the frame, enhancing the contrast. "This changes everything," she said quietly. Meanwhile, Logan Pierce's story began to unravel in silence. At the hospital, technicians ran a routine analysis on Logan's phone records. The logs showed a ping from Lauren's cell phone at Hyalite Overlook at the exact time of the supposed fall. Combined with the forged rehab papers now under scrutiny, her carefully rehearsed narrative was fraying at the edges. She didn't know yet, but the net was tightening. Atlas shifted restlessly at Logan's bedside, his amber eyes sharp, ears flicking at every sound in the ward. Nurses passing by often commented on how the dog seemed to anticipate changes before they happened. When Logan stirred in his sleep, murmuring incoherently, Atlas pressed closer, nudging his hand with a gentle nose. The bond between them was so palpable that even skeptical staff felt its gravity. In her office, Donna assembled the pieces: Rose's documents, Grace's raw files, Noah's field notes, the phone data. One by one, the pillars supporting the illusion of accident collapsed. Still, she knew cases weren't built on suspicion alone. She needed consistency, hard links, and time. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temple. "We've got the beginning of a case," she whispered. "But beginnings don't win trials." Grant and Noah returned to town that evening, snow dusting their coats as they walked into the station. They relayed their findings: the clean, accelerating tracks, the absence of brake marks. Dana listened, noting every detail. "It lines up with what we're seeing," she told them. "But we'll need more." Grace lingered in the corner, arms folded tightly, watching the professionals dissect her photo. A pang of guilt twisted her stomach. She had been the one to ignite the rumor of suicide, and now she was the one undoing it. She wondered if people would forgive her for that, or if it even mattered. As darkness fell over Bozeman, the town buzzed quietly with speculation. The compressed image still circulated online, fueling whispers of despair, while the truth, hidden in a raw file and a bundle of forged papers, sat in a police folder waiting for its moment to surface. At the hospital, Logan's eyelids fluttered, his lips parting. A nurse leaned closer, straining to catch his words. His voice was hoarse, barely audible, but one word seemed to form, shaped by cracked lips. Atlas stiffened, ears erect, his body taut with sudden attention. The monitor beeped steadily, filling the silence that followed. The nurse blinked, uncertain if she had heard what she thought she did. And outside the window, snow began to fall again, soft but relentless, as though the storm refused to release its grip on the truth. The Gallatin County Courthouse loomed against a gray sky, its stone facade crusted with ice from a lingering storm. Inside, the warmth was deceptive. The courtroom hummed with anticipation, journalists whispering in the gallery, veterans in uniform sitting stiff-backed, and townsfolk crowding into every available bench. At the front, Judge Naomi Redford presided from the bench, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, wire-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose. In her late 60s, she was tall, her frame still commanding despite age, with a reputation for stern fairness and little tolerance for theatrics. Her eyes swept the room, sharp as a hawk's, reminding everyone that truth mattered here. Logan Pierce sat near the front in his wheelchair, his frame thinner than before, a navy suit hanging loosely across his broad shoulders. His scarred face remained stoic, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of weariness. Atlas lay at his side, fur brushed sleek, service vest snug across his muscular chest. The German shepherd's amber eyes moved constantly, scanning, ears twitching at the shuffle of feet or the scrape of a chair. He wasn't just a dog in a courtroom. He was a sentinel. The prosecution opened with a series of exhibits, high-resolution prints from Grace Nolan's RAW file, showing the blurred silhouette of a figure at the wheelchair's handles, forensic reports of the wheelchair tracks with no sign of breaking, cell tower data that placed Logan Pierce's phone at Highlight Overlook that morning, and testimony prepared from Grant Sawyer and Rosa Martinez. Each piece fell into place, the room growing colder with every revelation. Grant, broad and square-shouldered, testified with the gravity of a soldier. His words were clipped but firm, his blue eyes hard. I found Logan 30 feet below, wedged between rocks. He couldn't have rolled himself. The tracks ran clean, straight. Somebody pushed him. Rosa followed, her hands clasped tightly as she described finding forged rehab letters in the trash and the voicemail transcript with Lauren's voice. Her accent thickened as her nerves showed, but her dark eyes never wavered from the truth. The courtroom leaned in as she finished, her voice breaking softly. I could not stay silent. Not when a life was nearly lost, Lauren sat at the defense table, immaculate in a charcoal gray suit, her black hair falling in careful waves over her shoulders. She looked thinner than before, stress etching faint lines at the corners of her mouth. When she spoke, her voice carried just enough tremor to suggest vulnerability. I was overwhelmed, she told the court. Caring for Logan has been more than I could bear. I made mistakes, but I never intended to hurt him. That morning, he insisted on going to the Overlook. I followed his wishes. It was icy, dangerous. It was an accident. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue, but her gaze flickered quickly toward the jury, measuring their reaction. For a moment, murmurs rippled across the gallery, some swayed by her polished performance. But then Detective Dana Cole stepped forward, holding a file. Her tall frame radiated calm authority, her close-cropped black hair damp from melting snow. She spoke evenly, each word carrying weight. Your Honor, the integrity of these proceedings requires full disclosure. The Assistant District Attorney assigned to this case, Trevor Lane, has a prior connection to the defendant. Heads turned as Trevor Lane, seated at the prosecution's table, stiffened. In his late 30s, Lane had a lean build, neatly combed dark hair, and a sharp jawline softened by the faint shadow of a beard. His tailored suit fit him too perfectly, his cufflinks gleaming in the courtroom lights. Lane was known for his confidence, some called it arrogance, his career marked by ambition and a knack for playing politics as well as law. Donna's words hit like a stone. She continued, Records indicate Mr. Lane previously advised Mrs. Pierce on property matters last year. This creates a clear conflict of interest. Gasps rippled through the room. Judge Redford's eyes narrowed, her gavel striking once to quiet the gallery. Mr. Lane, is this true? Trevor swallowed, his confident mask faltering. It was an informal consultation, Your Honor. Nothing substantive. Dana's voice remained calm but edged with steel. Informal or not, it compromises this trial. We cannot have an assistant DA sitting at the prosecution's table with prior ties to the defendant he is meant to prosecute. Judge Redford leaned forward, her gaze piercing. Mr. Lane, you will remove yourself from this case immediately. An internal investigation will determine the extent of this impropriety. Trevor's jaw tightened, his career unraveling in front of him. He rose stiffly, muttering, Yes, Your Honor, before exiting under the watchful eyes of both jury and press. His fall from grace added another layer of tension to a trial already dripping with betrayal. The remainder of the session moved quickly. With Trevor removed, the prosecution pressed its case with clarity. The defense struggled to recover, leaning heavily on Lauren's narrative of overburdened caregiving. But the evidence piled too high. Finally, Judge Redford delivered her decision, her voice firm and unwavering. Logan Pierce, this court finds you guilty of attempted murder, fraud, and falsification of legal documents. May justice serve as the mirror you refused to face, her gavel struck sharply, final and echoing. As murmurs swelled across the gallery, she added, "Furthermore, given the critical role of Atlas, the service dog, in Mr. Pierce's survival and recovery, I hereby recognize him as an official emotional support animal under state law. He will accompany Mr. Pierce in all necessary settings, public or private." The courtroom erupted in a mix of applause and gasps. Logan lowered his head, his hand trembling as it found Atlas's thick fur. The shepherd pressed against him, eyes steady, posture proud. For Logan, it wasn't just a legal victory, it was the acknowledgement of a bond deeper than words. Yet, as the crowd dispersed, Logan caught a glimpse of Lauren's eyes as she was led away in handcuffs. For a brief moment, her mask slipped, revealing not defeat, but something darker, something unreadable. The look chilled him, as though the story wasn't finished yet. Atlas growled low, ears pricking, sensing the shift. The sound echoed in Logan's chest as the bailiff's footsteps faded, leaving the courtroom heavy with an unease that refused to leave. The last snow of the season melted in slow rivulets down the pine slopes outside Bozeman, leaving the ground patchy with frost and earth. At the edge of the forest, where Hyalite Canyon breathed cold air even into spring, a new cabin stood, its cedar beams fresh, its porch wide and welcoming, smoke curling faintly from the chimney. The cabin was more than timber and nails. It was a gift. Funds had come in from veteran organizations, from neighbors who brought tools instead of cash, from strangers across Montana who had read Logan Pierce's story in the papers. And at the center of it all was Grant Sawyer, sleeves rolled up, hands blistered, swinging hammers alongside ranchers and carpenters until the final wall stood upright. Now Logan sat on the porch, a wool blanket draped across his knees, his wheelchair angled to catch the pale sunlight. He looked older than his 33 years, his beard grown fuller, streaks of silver visible when the light caught it. Yet his eyes, sharp and steady, no longer carried only pain. They reflected the strength of someone who had walked through betrayal and found a way forward, even if walking was now only metaphor. Atlas sprawled at his side, the German shepherd's sable coat glistening in the light. His chest was broad, his posture regal, and around his neck gleamed a small bronze medallion shaped like a star. It was a ceremonial honor given by the local Veterans Council, a recognition that Atlas was no ordinary dog, but a comrade, a survivor, and a hero. When the medallion was first placed around his neck, Atlas had simply tilted his head and wagged his tail, oblivious to ceremony, but Logan had nearly wept. Neighbors drifted by that afternoon, some carrying pies, others simply curious to see the cabin. Among them was Grace Nolan. She had dressed simply in jeans and a forest green coat, her auburn curls tied back loosely. Her hazel eyes, once clouded by guilt, now held a lighter hue. She carried a wrapped frame under one arm. Logan watched her climb the porch steps, a nervous smile tugging at her lips. "I thought you should have this," she said, handing the package to him. Logan unwrapped it carefully, his scarred hands fumbling against the paper until the print emerged. It was the RAW photo, enlarged and framed, showing the wheelchair at the cliff. But unlike the compressed version that had fueled rumor, this one revealed the blurred silhouette of another figure behind the chair. Truth, immortalized. Logan stared at it, his throat tight. Grace shifted uncomfortably. "I know it's a hard image, but it's also the proof that saved you. I didn't want you to remember the lie. I wanted you to have the truth." Logan's gaze softened. "It's more than proof. It's survival on paper." He set the frame against the wall, leaned forward, and extended his hand. Grace took it, her palm warm, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she felt absolved. Inside, Rosa Martinez moved quietly about the cabin, adjusting curtains, tidying dishes, her braids swinging against her back. She had insisted on helping Logan settle in, though no one had asked. The wrinkles around her dark eyes deepened as she smiled at Atlas, slipping him a piece of bread she'd hidden in her apron. To Rosa, loyalty had always mattered more than blood, and Logan had become her family. By late afternoon, the cabin grew quieter. Logan rolled to a desk where papers and flyers were spread out. At the top of each flyer were bold letters: K9 Vet Club, Veterans and Service Dogs, Building New Bonds. The program was his new purpose. With support from the VA, he would work with other veterans, teaching them how to train service dogs, building connections between broken men and loyal animals. The idea had started during his rehab, when doctors noticed how Logan's recovery quickened with Atlas at his side. Now, it had blossomed into something larger, something meant to heal more than just him. Grant entered then, brushing dust from his jacket. His square jaw was shadowed by stubble, and his blue eyes gleamed with pride. "The first group's signing up faster than I expected," he said, tapping one of the flyers. "Looks like you're onto something." He grinned, rare and genuine. Logan chuckled softly. "Guess it beats feeling sorry for myself." Grant's hand rested briefly on Logan's shoulder, a brotherly gesture that needed no words. They had survived different battles, but both knew survival meant nothing without purpose. The evening air turned crisp as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. Logan wheeled himself back to the porch, Atlas padding beside him. The dog pressed close, his body warm against Logan's legs, his amber eyes watching the horizon as though guarding against unseen threats. The valley lay still, Hyalites peaks catching the last light of day. Logan reached down, fingers brushing the thick fur at Atlas's neck, feeling the steady pulse of life beneath. His voice was low, almost a whisper, carried away by the wind. "You're not just Atlas. You're my anchor, my point of balance when everything else fell apart." Atlas lifted his head, ears flicking, as if he understood. His tail brushed against the porch boards, slow and steady. The last of winter's chill drifted from the valley, leaving behind the quiet promise of spring. In that moment, Logan realized the storm that had nearly ended him had also given him the chance to begin again. The cabin, the community, the program, the dog. Each was a piece of something larger. And as the sky darkened, he closed his eyes briefly, hearing the faint sound of wind chimes by the door, each note like a reminder that endings were simply new beginnings in disguise.